on our fictional writing arc of the story unit. Today we're going to be talking about developing our characters. Last week you brainstormed some seed ideas and you picked one of those seed ideas to hopefully grow into a story. And then we started thinking about the external and internal features of our characters, of our main character. And so you thought about what your main character looked like, and then you also felt about what kind of person they were as well. And today, we're going to take that a little bit of a step further, okay? So you're going to think a little bit more about your main character and really developing them into a strong figure in your story, okay? And as you can see, I have 5 bullet points here as kind of some advice for you for developing your character. So the first thing you can do is start with whatever you've decided matters to you about your character. Are they like you? Are they like someone you know? So before you even begin your story, you want to think about what really matters to you about this character that you've created. What's really important to you? Is it important that they are kind of like you? Is it important that they're kind of like someone you know, a friend, a family member? Is it important that they're the complete opposite of you? Is it important that they're the complete opposite of someone you know, a family or a friend? So really think about that first bullet point, because that's kind of where all the rest of them go as we go down this. The second piece of advice I have for you is to put together a character so that all the parts fit together and they make sense. So if you've decided that your character is fun and outgoing, well, then they should be into fun and outgoing things, or they should never be shy in certain situations. So, whatever you're thinking about for your story, make sure that all of those pieces of that character all go together. Because we can't run into a situation where you start writing your story and your character is supposed to be this outgoing and very helpful person, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the story or when the story is supposed to start getting really good that you're writing, they all of a sudden act completely different. We want to make sure that all those parts fit together, okay? The third point is reread often and asking yourself, do these different things make sense within one person? Do they fit together in a believable way? So that's just kind of a fancy way of saying, is everything that I'm writing or thinking about this character in the story, does that make sense for that one person to feel that? Or does it make sense for that one person to be able to do all of these things? I kind of like to think about it as like one of my favorite action movies. And that action hero is someone who can do everything. They can save people from tall building burnings. They can crash cars through buildings or through windows. They can run away from the people that are after them and never seem to run out of energy. That's not a really believable thing. In action movies, sure, but in the stories that we write, it needs to be believable. So if you have a character who's a really good athlete, it doesn't mean that they can run for days and days and days away from people, or uh, doesn't mean that they can dodge cars or something unbelievable like that. These characters need to make sense. They need to be real, okay? And it needs to fit together. All those things that you've been thinking about with them needs to fit together in a believable way. If you start writing your story, or if you kind of maybe give your story to a friend or a family member to read and they start to think, well, I don't really find that all that believable, then it might be time to rethink things when it comes to your characters in your story. The fourth thing here is to be specific in the descriptions or character traits you give your main character. All right, and that word traits should be a word that we're familiar with, but if you don't know what a character trait is, it's kind of like what a character is, the very special qualities that make that character who they are. So a character trait could be they're tall or they're skinny, or a trait could be that they're shy or they're outgoing or they're excitable or they're funny. Okay? So you need to be really specific in these descriptions of your character and in the character traits that you have given your main character. because your reader is going to look to that. Think about the stories that you've read and the main characters that you've read about in your stories. They were all really specific, and that description of them never ever changed. Even when we were reading The Tiger Rising and Rob himself changed as a character, he still had those sores on his leg. He still was pretty sad, although he wound up becoming happy at the end. But you could feel that Rob did things that were out of the ordinary, but for the most part, he remained the same. Okay? And so your stories need to reflect that as well. If a character seems too good to be true, make the character more complex and more human. So this one kind of drives me crazy when books and stories um, always seem to wind up where the main character never has anything go wrong. Everything works out perfectly. I mean, we all love happy endings, but we can all get to those happy endings, but make it a little bit more complex and a little bit more human, okay? Maybe you have someone who's trying to stay with their family and they're a foster kid and they want to try and find a good family. Well, you don't want to make it too unbelievable or too good to be true that the very first foster family that this foster kid has, they wind up adopting him and he grows on and they go on to do great things. You want to make it a little bit more exciting, make it a little more complex, make it a little bit more real. Because sometimes foster kids don't find that permanent home until like the fifth or the sixth family that they've been with. So make that character more complex and make that character more human. Make them more believable. And so here's a couple of ways that you can do that. So I thought about my character, which would be me, and I thought about my attitude to self. That means, how do I feel about myself? Since I'm kind of going to be writing a story that's based on me, how do I feel about myself? How does my character feel about myself? Well, feels like they're happy go lucky, they're frustrated with their sister's behavior, and I knew I could make a plan to get back at my sister. So that's kind of what I was thinking with my character. The attitude of others. How do other people feel about your character? My mom believed that I would get back at my sister eventually. Sister did not like Tim at all. Tim is me, remember? She was always mean and played with Tim's mind. Evan and Ryan both liked being friends with Tim and always had fun with Tim as well. So, I have just laid out how that character feels about themselves, and I've also laid out how the other people in my story are going to feel about them. Okay? So that's something that we could definitely take a look at. And I'm going to give you this T chart as well to look at and to figure out for you to work on in this at the end of this video, because I think this really helps to figure out what your character is, who your character is, and to develop your character. How do they feel about themselves, and how do others feel about them? So here's a quick scene that I just decided to write down because I'm really feeling my character Tim. It's basically me, but I'm changing the names, and I really want you to get a good feel of what my character Tim looks like, how he acts, kind of the person that he might be. And so I just started to write these ideas in a paragraph. Tim sat on the uncomfortable brown lounge chair in the living room of his two-story yellow-sided house. He sat there fearful of the moment his sister would get home from gymnastics class. When she got home, it usually meant lots of screaming, name-calling, and kicks to the back. Tim brushed his hands through his short blonde hair and could feel the sweat start to come. His sister would be bursting through the door any moment now, and he knew that would mean trouble. So, will I include this in my story? Who knows? Will I be able to use this and kind of base this off of who I think this character is, this character Tim is, who I'm kind of basing on me? And can I use that as a way to keep writing my story? Can I use the way that other characters, namely the sister in the story, feel about me? Yes, absolutely. But I couldn't do any of this if I didn't have a good idea of who my character was. So your job today in this assignment is to fill in that chart that I'm going to give to you. The attitude to the character themselves and the attitude other people have about your character. That T chart will help you to develop something like this. Now, you don't need to write a paragraph, but I did find this actually pretty helpful when I was thinking about my story. Just writing a quick paragraph about how my story might begin, or just what Tim does before he waits for his sister. Okay? So you're going to fill in a chart that looks like this for our assignment today. I can't wait to see how you feel your character feels about themselves and how other characters feel about your main character as well.